Good evening, everyone. I'm Danielle Citron. I am the director of the Law Tech Center at UVA Law School and a professor at the law school. And I'm excited to have this wonderful webinar and chance to talk to Julia Dahl about her book, The Missing Hours. So let me first, though, start by thanking the folks at the Law Tech Center, our co-sponsors, the Law, Innovation, Security, and Technology Student Group, and the Virginia Journal on Law and Technology. So now I have the honor of introducing Julia Dahl, she's a crime writer and a journalism professor at NYU. But I first got to know Julia when she was a crime reporter for CBS and then became, I think, the deputy managing editor of the Crime Report. And over the last 8 years, we sort of flipped the script, and I am now the uber fan for Julia's crime novels. Her first mystery, Invisible City, won a series of awards for best first novel and the Boston Globe's best books of 2014. And her mysteries keep making its way into all of these like best books lists. And so she has a series of 3 books. Rebecca Roberts is the protagonist, and I always ping Julia and say, when's the next one coming? I'm on the edge of my seat. I need another one. And what the coup de grace, so there are 3 of them, Invisible City, Run You Down, and Conviction. They're brilliant. And this 4th book, though, is not in that series. It's called The Missing Hours. And it is a sort of standalone thriller, gripping crime book. And again, that too has won a series of awards, hailed by the New York Times as a great reckoning with the moment that we find ourselves in. So just before we get started, I just want to say to the audience, please put your questions in the Q&A box which appears at the bottom of our screens. Andrew's gonna help me take questions and put them in the chat. So Julia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, thank you.
It's great fun being your fan and turning the tables, as opposed to you calling me for expert advice. I now, in the last 8 years, have been looking to you for inspiration, right? For art and education. So it's been a great joy.
It's super cool to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
So Julie, would you tell our audience a bit about the book, The Missing Hours, and how your reporting informed the sort of gripping story at the heart of the novel?
Sure. Yeah. So The Missing Hours is a story. Basically, chapter 1 is a young woman, a college freshman named Claudia, wakes up. She knows that she's been sexually assaulted, but she has no idea what happened. She was drunk the night before. And the book is how she and the people around her and the perpetrators deal with it. Basically, it's sort of like the bomb of the assault goes off and the shrapnel goes everywhere. And the book is at some level about her figuring out, and we can talk about this a little more, that the law is not really going to help her, and what she's going to do to find her own measure of justice instead of going to the police in the way that we're sort of told we're supposed to do. But the genesis of the book, it's funny, when I was thinking about talking to you about this, I realized that I've been writing one way or another about sexual assault or abuse since the very beginning of my career as a crime journalist. I sort of started my career in entertainment and women's magazines, but around 2004, I started writing stories for 17 magazine about crimes against and by teenagers. And the very first story I was sent on was out to a young woman's home in Tennessee. She had accused her cousin of assaulting her, and it had become a sort of a traumatic situation in many ways, mostly because law enforcement and her family refused to believe her, right? And I remember sitting in her living room with her, and she, with my tape recorder, right? And she just told me the whole story of what she remembered and what she didn't remember. And what she dwelled on, though, was not the assault. What she dwelled on was the pain and the trauma of, and then I told my dad and he didn't believe me. And then I told my mom and he didn't believe me. And, they didn't want me to go to anyone else because they thought, we don't believe you, right? And those stories sort of kept coming up. That was the first time. But then I moved on. I spent time at the New York Post. I was a reporter there, which is what my series of Invisible City is about. But then I got to work. I went to a nonprofit criminal justice news site called The Crime Report. And that was a really great job because it was sort of like I got to write about anything in criminal justice that I found interesting, which is rare, right? And there I really started to get more serious about writing about sex crimes and issues around them. I wrote a couple stories that, and all these stories that I'll tell really informed The Missing Hours. It was sort of like, it was almost like I was sort of gearing up to write this book after so many years of reporting. The first one I remember doing a big piece on rape kits, right? And the thousands, tens, thousands, million, hundreds of thousands that are languishing and going bad in freezers all across America, right? And I remember interviewing a woman who'd been assaulted years ago and nothing had happened. And then finally, literally 20 years later, she gets a phone call and they're like, we've matched the DNA that we found in you in the early 80s, right? And just listening to her story of the pain of that 20 years of sort of having the law enforcement kind of be like, well, there's not a lot we can do, you don't have a proper description. I did another story about the difficulty involved in prosecuting men who sort of sell young women for sex, right? So that, especially teenagers, they get sort of, they have difficult home lives, they get caught up with, with men who say they love them and then, sell them, but if they won't testify against the men, it's all but impossible to get the men behind bars, that kind of thing. So I wrote those stories. And then I moved on to CBS News. And when I was there, I pitched sort of a series about crimes against women, sex crimes against women. And I did two stories that really then informed The Missing Hours. One was, this was around, I think it was about 2013, when college camp, so obviously campus sexual assault is something that's been going on as long as there have been campuses, right? But in the early aughts, is that right? Early aughts? No, early teens. I don't really know how to talk about the decades these days. Yeah. It wasn't the 80s. It was more recently. College students on college campuses, it was like college campuses, when I was in college in the 90s, nobody talked about sexual assault, right? I mean, it was, and if you got drunk and something happened to you, it was, it was like, you shouldn't have gotten so drunk, right? And that conversation, thank God, has changed. But what we found out in around 2010, 2012 was that girls were coming forward and saying, this happened to me, something, I was drunk or I was with someone and he did this and he lives on my hall, help me. But the colleges hadn't caught up. They didn't really know how to deal with it. And at some level, I don't blame them. I mean, as we all know, sexual abuse and sexual assault is one of the most complicated crimes for police to investigate. Colleges don't really have the resources for that, but they needed to get themselves together to have, ways to collect this information, to deal with the young women, to deal with, to do some kind of mediation if there was some, to go to cops if necessary. And a lot of universities just couldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. And so I did a profile of these women at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, who sued the university for the way that the university had dealt with, or rather not dealt with, their sexual abuse on campus or near campus. And then I did another story about women in DC who talked about having been sexually assaulted, but that the most traumatic part of the situation was not the sexual assault, but when they went to the police and the police didn't believe them or treated them like they were the ones who should be ashamed of themselves and stuff like that. So all that stuff was kind of in my head. And then in 2012 came the Steubenville case. And I don't know if some of you, many of you may have heard of that, maybe not. I realize it's 10 years ago now, but long story short, and I was working as a reporter at CBS News. A story broke out of Steubenville, Ohio. And interestingly enough, the story really broke because Anonymous, you remember that like kind of hacktivist group? Mm-hmm. But right. So they got involved. Somehow they learned about it. And basically what had happened was a teenage girl went to a party, got, very intoxicated and was assaulted by at least two boys. And what sort of made this story be the most egregious was that because, when everybody has a cell phone, they took pictures and they took videos. And so the girl wakes up the next morning and she knows something's happened. She has no idea what. But all of a sudden, these pictures are going around among her friends. And eventually one of the pictures gets to an adult, and, there's a little bit of sort of, the boys involved were the football team. The football team was state champions. It's almost like a cliche, the way the town sort of rallied around the boys. And finally, Anonymous gets involved and sort of does this thing where they're like, if you don't arrest these boys or do something, we're going to hack into all your computers and, destroy you all. Right. So I covered that case over the next year or so while they were doing the investigation, while people, at the school were getting fired, and while they were defending the boys, and while then the boys got indicted, and two were convicted. And I couldn't stop thinking, but the thing I thought about this case more like over and over was I could not stop thinking about this young girl and what it must have been like for her. But even further, what it must have been like for her mom, her sister, her best friend, to know that, especially for the girl, to know that every time you meet somebody for the rest of your life, especially if you're staying in this town, you would have no idea if they'd seen these pictures of you in this traumatic, humiliating moment. And that, like, I couldn't get that out of my head. And over, I was starting to see, and this is when you and I, Danielle, started to connect, right? Over and over, so I was starting to see cases like this. Rehtaeh Parsons, Audrey Potts. These are girls who had intimate photos of themselves, either ones that they'd taken or a boyfriend had taken, or that had been taken of them surreptitiously, spread around the internet, and they committed suicide. Young teenage girls, right? And I was seeing that over and over, and I realized, and so as a crime reporter, I'm thinking, this is interesting. Who should I talk to about, and a lot of the stories out of like the local affiliates were like, the parents saying things like, we went to the cops and they said there was nothing we could do, and that sort of caught my ear, like, nothing you can do. But then I found Danielle, and I found Marianne Franks, the two of you sort of together. Right. And, I realized that one of the things that you were talking about was that the ability of technology to perpetrate crimes, that the law hadn't caught up to what the crimes were. And that was creating this difficulty and trauma for a lot of women. So I started writing about that. And I always knew that I wanted to write that story of, like, I mean, I think of Claudia in some ways, although her personality and life is very different from the young woman in Steubenville, but very much I spent years thinking, what was it like for that young woman? And when I wrote The Missing Hours, that was what I wanted to do, was explore and try to, this is what art and literature does, right? Like, we try to sort of put a mirror up to society, right? And to force people into a moment, if possible, of empathy, right? So I spent a lot of painful time sort of closing my eyes and thinking, this has happened to you. Where do you feel it in your body? What do you do? What questions would you have? And that kind of thing. If this has happened to your sister, what do you do? And that was sort of where I went with The Missing Hours. And the fact that a crime like that affects so many different people. It's not just the person whose body the crime is perpetrated on, but her family, the perpetrator's families, right? Like, people that aren't even involved get roped in because it's crimes are really just sort of spread. Long-winded, perhaps.
No, what you captured, I think, so beautifully in the book, that what I think makes it painful when you first read it, and why I read it in 4 hours, couldn't put it down. I was like gripped. Is that you really capture the sense of because the sexual assault was taped and shared, and that it would be almost like an endless violation against her body, and this shame that Claudia feels, and that no one will care.
Yeah.
And that sense of, like, having been slut shamed before, almost like she had that, she was taped while doing a reality TV show, right? Kissing, and then slut shamed. So she had sort of reckoned with this idea of being shamed for her sexuality in ways that seem so prosaic, right? That how awful to be shamed for that, but then how she suffers, right? When the sexual assault, there is a video witness, and that others are sharing that video, right? And so it hits you, right? And what I think And worth would be, I'd love to hear a bit more about, you experience firsthand as a reporter, victims saying to you that law enforcement, they go to law enforcement, and every time it was like a terrible rinse and repeat, nothing we can do,
Yeah.
either blaming the victims
Right.
or not believing them, right? Like,
Right.
oh, you sure that happened to you?
Right.
Even
Right.
if there's like video proof of these a sexual assault, and you hold up a mirror in a most devastating way, right?
Yeah.
The book does. That is, you really echo reality. And there's this one part of the book that it would be interesting for you to talk about a bit, where you say, like, Claudia is thinking about how New York has this newly passed revenge porn law. And she's like, they're not going to help me.
Right. Right.
Right. And so maybe a bit more, because you have this choice, I'm sure, as a writer, where you think, like, do I give any hope? Do you know what I'm saying? And that, I guess, is the story of Retribution, the non-legal, extra legal part. And you gave us so much to think about in this book about the criminal justice system and how kind of unfair and random it is, right? And so, and how that costs victims, like, internalize. So just because you
one of
have
the things,
that choice, like how does that affect you as a writer, and as you're thinking about the way in this, to me, this book is so important as a clarion call of education. And I have it in my appendix in my new book. Should read, because we can really see suffering and how you educate and legal change that you helped launch as a result of your reporting. So just like a little bit more, because your work both has helped spur legal change. It has. That reporting helped get lawmakers to care, right, as we were advocating, and now serves as education. But it's bleak, right? So like, what in that moment as you're writing, like, did you think about not having, like, please maybe help a little, or was that just something like, I want this to be as brutal and realistic as possible? Do like those choices that you made? It would be interesting to unpack a little bit.
One of the things I really wanted to do with this was, when you're a reporter, and I think this probably happens as an attorney too. When you're a reporter, there's this sort of unspoken thing about who deserves coverage and who doesn't, right? Like, so if you're watching Dateline or 2020 or whatever, you're not getting, the people that get the 1 hour, 2 hour specials are the white ladies in suburbia who've been kidnapped and murdered, right? It's not, a Black woman who's, maybe had a drug problem, or it's not a woman of any race that's been involved in sex work. It's not someone, it tends not to be, frankly, even just someone who doesn't have a lot of money, right? There's this sense of like, a good victim and a not so good victim. And that pisses me off, right? And one of the things that this book for me was so much about was that it does not matter. Like that getting drunk is not, the result of getting drunk should not be rape, right? Getting the result of being sexually active should not be rape, right? That everyone deserves justice when they've had a violation of their body, right? But that's just not the case. And so one of the things that I wanted to do with this book was to make the protagonist, Claudia, not the most likable person around. Like, she's not the happy, the pretty virgin who, I was raped my first time, right? That's not terrible, but like, I wanted to make her somebody that I knew it would be challenging to feel sorry for, right? She's rich, she's white, she's privileged, she's educated. She's used social media and, frankly, her body to get attention. She's not, she would be easy. I think about this, like, I remember, watching like reality shows, like the Bravo shows. And I think, God, it's so easy to hate some of those girls, right? Like, the way they portray them, it just feels so careless and kind of vain and stuff, but like, none of them deserve to be raped either, and so I really wanted to make her somebody that I knew it would be, a lot of people are just going to be like, ew, like, in my generation, it was like the Paris Hilton girl, right? Who kind of, it's just so easy to be like, ugh. But I also, the script flip a little was that Claudia, usually if you're wealthy and white and connected, you can manipulate the justice system to get what you need, right? But the one time you can't really do that, right? It's sexual assault.
Yeah.
Women can't really do that with sexual assault. In fact, they might even be less likely to be, well, I don't know if they'd be less likely to be believed than just, frankly, a woman who's experiencing homelessness or a woman who has a drug problem,
Yeah.
right? But they're just as likely, obviously, by police. I mean, obviously was the wrong word. But so I wanted to highlight the fact that even somebody in the super privileged position is not really privileged when it comes to this particular thing, and how egregious that is, or how much that shows how far we have to go. And then I also really wanted her to be sort of savvy enough, and I think a lot of young women today are, to know, to sort of look at what happened to her with clear eyes and say, nobody's going to believe me. Nobody's going to care. And that's the fear, right? Is that like, that if we report enough about, like, I don't know if you guys have seen the, I think it's based on a ProPublica series. The Netflix did that series, Unbelievable, with
Yes.
That's
another one.
Same thing. I mean, it's like, it gives me chills thinking about it, right? Like this, like, I just didn't believe her, right? She had maybe lied before, whatever. But this is like this awful double-edged sword, because women now know that it's going to be a challenge, not just to get people to believe you, but even if they believe you, you're going to have to tell your story 100 times. You're going to have to tell it to strangers. You're going to be, this thing happened to you once is going to take over your life for. That's one of the things I learned through the Chanel Miller memoir, Know My Name, right? So she was the young woman in the Stanford swimmer sexual assault case. She's brilliant, and her memoir is brilliant. And that one of the things I learned from reading that memoir, which I read, as I was writing this book, was, just years of reliving the worst moment of your life, in the small hope that somebody gets put in prison for, I don't know, a few years, maybe, and that's very unlikely. So a lot of women know this, and so of course they don't go to police. But I also didn't want to continue that cycle, because I don't know. I don't know what victims should do. I think every everybody who survived this has to make the decision for themselves, and it's not an easy decision. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I mean, it's real easy for me to be like, if you're sexually assaulted, you should go to police. We can get him.
Yes.
But it's just not that. It's not that black and white.
Yeah. And like, if you could have a magic wand and fix everything, Julia, that is the response would be appropriate from law enforcement.
Yeah.
Given your experience, like, would you say, like, is there any way in which this criminal justice system doesn't hurt somebody? And
I guess the problem, it's like, it's the only crime where the default is to not believe the perpetrator, or not, I'm sorry, the person, the victim. As part of me, I write a little bit about this in the book, doesn't like using the word victim, but it is a victimization. I'm not sure, some people say survivor, but then some people also would say, like, I'm not sure I've survived this entirely, I'm living, but I think that it's got to be, it's got to be individual people, from the nurses to the counselors to the police themselves, who lead with, if the default is, I believe you, then maybe we've made progress, but I don't know how I really don't know how we get there. I really don't. I wish I did.
But your book is a step in the right direction. That is, the more that we educate lawmakers and law enforcers, parents, teachers, students, that each and every one of us are part of this dialectical conversation, where don't blame the victim, don't assume that she's got it wrong. Right. That's how changing hearts and minds is a huge part of social attitudes, the relation between social attitudes and law, legal change it's such a tight connection. And here, I think your work is doing that. It's hard to read. It's necessary. Right. And then you're also imaginative, and the revenge part to me was like, that's the fun of your work too, is that a little, that revenge part as well was like slightly satisfying.
Right. Well, right. Exactly. So you kind of like, do I think you should do what Claudia did? Not
Yeah.
necessarily, but I also really, not really, but I want to, part of this book was at some level me having a little revenge fantasy, me being like, okay, so this has happened to a young woman.
Yeah.
She has decided the cops are not going to help me, but again, she has privilege, she has money, she has resources. So she's going to be like, I'm going balls to the wall. Like, I'm going to F these guys up and, let the chips fall where they may. And I don't think, the book, some people find the ending of the book a little bit unsatisfying, and it's very hard to end a book. But I think it's unsatisfying in a way because Claudia's story is not even close to over. Like, she's not, having done this is not like it heals her, right?
Yes.
She's healing from this forever. She maybe takes a little power back, and maybe that is some tiny step toward that. But there's no happy, easy ending for people who've dealt with this or whose family, and that was part of the reason I spent so much time with her sister in this book, was because her sister sort of isn't there for her in her time of need. Not really that she doesn't really know that it was her time of need. So, but I think that happens to a lot of us, right? Like this happens to a friend, or it happens to a sibling. And through no real fault of our own, we're not there in that moment. And that shame and guilt can really break people apart. But one of the things I kind of wanted to do in this book was to kind of, encourage the idea that that we can and should forgive each other when we're, with family members and friends, like that we have to give each other a break a little bit when we let each other down. Because I imagine that if this had happened in my family, or probably in a lot of families, there's a lot of strife, and you weren't there for me, or you're not there for me in the way I need you to be there for me. But nobody really knows how I don't know maybe how I need you to be there for me, and vice versa. And so, part of the healing, I think, for this book, and maybe for a lot of people, is simply like figuring out a way to stay close and connected with the people they cared about.
Yeah. So now I'm going to bring our Law Tech Center Fellow Max Larson into the conversation to ask the first question from from our group.
Hi, thanks for speaking with us again today and for writing the book. It was definitely very interesting. And I think I'm certainly in the camp of people you mentioned who found the ending, unsatisfying. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, you talked about your history of writing from journalism and what the role of having this be fiction played, because as you mentioned, it's very much shining a mirror on society. Everything in here felt, I was talking to Professor Citron about this, it felt like, wow, this, everything in here feels very realistic. And that was really sad to see. And, even this person with so much privilege is like, the police aren't going to help me. And the legal system really doesn't help anyone. And the only times we see it playing a role, it's, it feels unjust. It's, the friend who was in the house and he was allowed to be there, but, the police are coming after him for trespassing. And so I'm curious what went into the decision of having it be fiction, but yet so accurate, and not having it be this version of, and it's a fiction where we have some crime fighters who come in, or where vigilantism is a viable option. Because I found her revenge deeply unsatisfying. It was like, this helps no one. It hurts you more. This is sad. This is, not a positive solution for society at all. And, is criminalization really the route we want? You just see, you see a little bit of how incarceration ruins people's lives too. So I guess I'm curious sorry, that was a little incoherent, but if you can just talk about, I guess, the role of this being fiction and yet also hyper realistic, and not, I guess, what is the role for lawyers reading this who want to make positive changes? Do we see things in the book, or how does that work?
Right. I mean, I think, one of the things I realized as I was writing this, and I was sort of thinking about one of the things that Claudia does, is that there's not really any good choices when something like this happens to you, right? There's a great line, and this is random, but there was a series written based on a Celeste Ng book called The Little Fires Everywhere. And it's about two Black women and white women, among other things, and sort of their various privileges. And I remember the white woman saying something like, I made good choices. And the Black woman says to her, you didn't make good choices, you had good choices. And I realized as I was writing this, that Claudia doesn't really have any good choices, right? Like she knows that, or at least she feels, again, as a 19-year-old, with a sense that she's already sort of a slut in the eyes of a lot of the world, right? That if she goes to the police, they're gonna say, well, you were drunk, and haven't you already hooked up with this one guy, and then if she and then what's the other option, right? Like, so she does some really ugly things, and I don't think those are the right things to have done, right? And crucially, I don't think they will make her happy, right? I guess the book, and you're right, like about this, it's really, in that way, it's really a dark book, because like Claudia's not going to leave this book in any way happy. She's not really making good decisions, but kind of what I wanted to show was that given like the what got dropped on her plate that night and in the days since, she didn't really have good decisions, that our system, whatever, does not allow her to have good decisions, because she knows if she goes to police, say, she's concerned not only that they'll sort of say like that, they'll sort of shrug and say like, I can't prove that he raped you, or more crucially, I would try, but a jury won't believe me, right? Like that's one of the things you talked about, what lawyers can kind of do. And I've talked to, in sort of reporting this book, I talked to prosecutors, and there are some prosecutors that sort of say that will bring a hard case to a jury, a case where maybe the victim, sorry, I have something in my eye, so I'm like, I put mascara on for this, and now it's like backfiring, where they will decide, this case is difficult, she was intoxicated, we don't have a witness, but I believe her, I'm going to take it to trial. But I think a lot of prosecutors will say like, are worried, frankly, more about their conviction rate, and will say, I don't feel good about a jury decision here, I'm not going to take it to trial. But if they don't try, whatever. So I think, some of it is, there's a way that prosecutors in the system can, like I said before, kind of default toward believing the victim and default toward believing that a jury will believe the victim. So that would be great. I don't know, that would be a big change, I think.
Okay, great. So, and thank you so much for talking about the ways in which it's hard for lawyers even to like undo these structures of injustice and social attitudes that are challenging. So we have some questions in the queue, and one is from my colleague, Professor Kathy Wang, and it is, can you talk a bit about the decision to make Claudia a social media influencer? To me, that sends really a great message to young women, that just because you share like a part of your life, it doesn't mean that nothing, is private.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that.
Right. I mean, that's the thing, is like, you can and should be able to still have boundaries that you decide about in your life, right? Like you decide, I'm going to share this picture of me in bikini. Cool. I mean, if I was 19 and super hot in the year 2022, I might be putting up a picture of myself in a bikini too. Why not? Right. That's it. There are consequences to that. But those consequences at some level are about other people's perception that maybe, and then the question is like, how much do you sort of say, screw you in your old time perception? But then how much do you sort of have to recognize that the reality is some people are going to look at you and think X, right? That, that's something that you have to manage. I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong way. You have to know, as somebody who's, any of us on social media have to know, we have to find some kind of balance between our real lives and what we share on social media. And I think a lot of us, I certainly do, kind of struggle with this sometimes, sharing a little too much. But that's sort of like, just because you're a social media influencer, just because you're a movie star, just because you're a public person, does not mean you are not allowed to have privacy, right? But I think, the media and just the population in general is so hungry for sort of, I mean, I guess it's like just a human nature thing. Like people that we admire, we love to tear them down, right? People that are beautiful, we love to see them ugly. Like, and that system exists. And so when you are putting yourself out there, and this is the problem with young people, right? Is because when you're young, your brain's not developed. You haven't figured out life yet. Like you can't be expected to have all this wisdom. It's not possible for you to have that at 18 or 19, right? So there's a risk involved, but I still think, I mean, the bottom line is just that if you're like a social media person, right, you get to control your social media. That's the deal. And when somebody taking your control from you is just that, somebody taking your control from you. And that's a violation, I think. Whether or not it's a legal violation.
No, I think so well said, right? That the ways in which we manage the boundaries around our intimate lives ought to be up to us. And it's not an all or nothing proposition, which you make really clear. That is the broader theme that you bring out, and which I think is a real positive, right? That Claudia is an influencer. She uses these tools and she shouldn't be condemned for it. Right. And even to the extent that she would choose sexual expression to be shared, and she didn't, that first incident with being on that Rich Kids of the Hamptons or whatever incident in the book, right? Where she, like unknowingly they're hiding cameras in the bushes, and then she's sort of sexually shamed for just kissing someone in the pool. But we're nuanced in how we think about privacy, and that we ought to be able to manage those boundaries in ways that are nuanced, and that it's not open season on your privacy to say, oh, you were on that reality TV show, so you have no privacy in other aspects of your life. And I think the book is a really important educative tool to help us see that there is nuance here, that it's complicated, and that privacy isn't an all or nothing, proposition. So I think that was really beautifully done in the book. So we've got some questions more about sexual assault. So if you want to answer these or feel comfortable, great.
I mean, I can try.
So, I have a question about the sort of creative process, which I think you're going to like too. So Alex asks, what was your creative process for writing The Missing Hours? Beyond drawing on your own wealth of experience as a former reporter on sexual assault, cyber assault, and sex crimes, did you feel the need to conduct research and consult like legal and criminal justice experts? And did you engage, especially in certain types of media or works of fiction that you thought were helpful as you wrote this?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I read Chanel Miller's memoir, which I highly recommend everyone involved in law read, because it's such a detailed and beautiful and harrowing story about what she went through deciding to stand up and testify against this person. So I read that. I read a wonderful book by Michelle, I'm forgetting her name. Rape is Not a Crime. Brilliant. About a woman who's sexual, and basically, I mean, and honestly, like I feel like I think of that all the time when I see headlines like of people getting away with stuff. It's like, rape is just not a crime. Brilliant book. I'm trying to think what else. And then I did do, use my reporter skills, and I did interview people, right? So I had early in the process with The Missing Hours, when I was kind of just figuring out what had happened to her and how, and stuff. I interviewed a woman I know who used to be a sex crimes prosecutor, now writes mystery novels, Alison Liotta. And she, do you know Allison? Yeah.
No, I'm like a fan. So yeah.
Right. Okay, great. So
stuff.
She and I we were actually together at a mystery writers conference back in the days of conferences. Yeah. Having like brunch together in New Orleans. And I was telling her about my idea for the story, blah, blah, blah. And she was the one who talked to me a little bit about, I sort of said like, what are, if you're prosecuting a sex crime, and there's been, somebody's been drinking, what are some of the, and she said those are the hardest, by far the hardest to do, because, you can sort of say like, maybe she consented and didn't remember, or maybe he thought she consented, the signals are mixed, but I remember her saying that. But if she loses control of her bodily functions, so if she urinates, if she vomits, if something like that, that can be one of the things that for a jury, they can be like, did she consent? Did she not? But something like that, proof of something like that can really put it over the edge for a conviction. So if you've read the book, you know that that's a moment that somebody talks about that exact thing. And then, right, the movie that most closely sort of hits with this book is a movie that came out last year. Promising Young Woman.
Yes,
right?
I knew you were going to say that.
Right.
Yes.
So I had finished the book by the time that movie came out, and I avoided watching it because when I read reviews about it, I remember thinking, oh, this is so much like what I've written. I didn't want to watch it because I was like, oh, what if it's better? Or what if it is too similar?
Right.
Whatever. Anyway, I finally watched it. I loved it. I mean, oh God, it's so
a perfect compliment those here.
So right. And I remember finishing it and kind of sighing and going, okay, we have taken very similar stories and material and done different things with them.
Yeah.
And that was a relief for me, but definitely that's a movie that I would recommend when you're thinking about sort of the way that the trauma ripples, because the central character in this book or in that movie is not the victim of sexual assault, it's her best friend, and the clear trauma she went through after what happened to her friend. So yes, and I do that for most of my books. Do some research here and there. The book I'm writing now is much more a little bit in all my other books have been in some way or another inspired by news stories I've covered. But the book I'm writing now is a little more personal, so it's less research intensive, which is sort of fun. But also I miss research because I get to like meet and talk to people like Danielle, right? Like I get to, call up people who have deep knowledge in something and just like pick their brains. And that's super fun.
So no return to Rebecca?
Not yet. I think I will probably
You'll go back to her, no?
book. I know, but this book that I'm writing does have a reporter.
Okay.
It's a young man, but I do I want to write more. That was one of the things I missed with The Missing Hour. I was like, I want to write another reporter. Like, I just like reporters. There's so many different kinds of reporters now, and they are dealing with so much with the changes in the industry and all that stuff. So there is a reporter in this book.
Yeah, no, I still love Rebecca. That I had one of my neighbors at work, Dan Ortiz, is also a mystery fan and hadn't read The Invisible City. So I was like, you must now stop and go on Amazon and buy Invisible City. So you can get to know Rebecca and become obsessed with her as I am. So he's like, oh yeah. He checked in with me later and agreed. What's so interesting about the book too is the ripple effect that you, I think, so carefully draw out, that is sexual violence and violations of intimate privacy have a way in which they alienate victims from their families, and the damage that the rings of damage that happen to victims, their families, and then groups that as other people that are up in their situation, like other women looking at Claudia's, if other women see what happened, they're like, there's no way I'm going forward either. Right. And I think that's an important part of the story that you captured really beautifully, was like the shattering of communities and loved ones, and ways in which it exacerbates like silences between people, that you almost, at least we see that in intimate privacy violations, that like people become super alienated from their families because their families don't believe them. They're embarrassed,
right. Or they're embarrassed, right? Yeah.
About what happened to them, and then don't handle it well, right?
Right. I mean, somebody comes into your home and breaks in and steals things or whatever, you tell everybody, you shout it to the rap, I mean, but nobody's getting on Facebook and being like, last night, I something happened to me in the basement of in a bar bathroom. You just don't talk about it. It's like you don't talk about it. And it's a different kind of crime. And so when it's not talked about, it becomes this sort of shameful secret thing, as if being the victim of it is shameful, right? And that it is in the air, right? So women and men, actually there's a wonderful book that came out last year by Caitlin called The Damage. This book?
I'm writing it down.
Brilliant book. Hold on a second. It's right here. Oh, here it is. Hold on. I'm showing it to you.
Okay. Wonderful.
The Damage. Caitlin Warer.
Okay.
Just got nominated for the same award I was nominated for, the best first novel by the Edgar Awards. And it's about a male college student who's the victim of a sexual assault, and all the ripple effects of that, and the shame involved, maybe even compounded when the victim is a man, right? all different, sort of a whole different set of problems. And it's a really interesting look at that, because it's not just women.
Yep, it's the sort of ways in which sort of invidious or bigoted stereotypes and gender norms are reinscribed by the silence, and especially when, young boys or young male adults are raped by coaches. The
Yes.
difficulty of men coming and boys coming forward is compounded too, because it almost feminizes them, right, and reduces them.
Right, exactly. And that's, he, in this book, the young man is like, everyone thinks, well, you're big, you could have fought him off, right? And there's this, if it could even be more shameful to come forward for, for a woman, it's like, it's that much more shameful for a man. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's ugly.
So I got another great question. So given the subject matter that you write about and your intimate knowledge of the vindictive nature of these types of perpetrators, as well as those who engage in online harassment of women who speak out on these subjects more generally, have you ever thought of or felt you might write under a pseudonym? And had you ever considered that? And what has made you not choose for this book in particular? Not because, of course, your other novels, this is again like the sort of thing that intimate privacy violations can create.
Yeah,
backlashes from men's rights groups. Did you think about writing under a pseudonym for this one?
Right. I mean, I remember interviewing a woman who writes about this, and she was like, if you get on the internet and write about rape, you will be threatened with rape on the internet. Like, that's what happens, right? And so we know, you and I are on Twitter, and a lot of people are. Like, so many of the women who really take these issues to task and take men, systems and men, people in power to task on this. Absolutely. I mean, if you start looking at their mentions, I mean, it's horrifying. And then sometimes they'll, screenshot an email they got, I wish you this, get raped and this and that. I have been very lucky. I left CBS News in 2018, and I was writing mostly about sexual assault, I guess maybe a little earlier, like in the 2012, 14, 15, and somehow, I got a few emails or, Twitter posts that saying, ugly things about me, but somehow I managed to avoid that. I don't know how or why, but I've, knock wood, never been really threatened online, knock wood right now. So that didn't really occur to me. But I can certainly understand why people do. And I can understand why people pull back from writing about this stuff, because I mean, you have to be, you have to take care of your own sanity at some level, right? And your own safety and your family's safety. But, to answer that question, no, I've not been the victim of that. So I've been lucky.
So, okay. Another question is, do rape kits and having victims recount their stories further traumatize victims, and how do you think the criminal or medical system could make the process better for victims of sexual assault?
Right. I mean, that's the thing. And that was one of the things that I thought was so beautifully done in that series, Unbelievable, was sort of that, okay, you've been assaulted. If you decide to call police and sort of go through with, I'm going to press charges, and I'm going to allow, because your body is the crime scene, right? Yeah. So then you have to allow your body to have evidence taken from it. So you go to the hospital, and they, if you're lucky, you get to a hospital that has what's called a sexual assault nurse, right? And these are nurses who have specifically been trained to interact with sexual assault victims, because I mean, they're doing, they're having to pluck hairs, and they're having to take swabs, and they're basically having to invade your body again, right? And that, no matter if that's done with care and with some understanding of the fact that you've just gone through a trauma, I think it can be better than if not. But even so, it's going to be painful and traumatic. So if you don't have those nurses who are specially trained, and that's the thing, and it's like, we need at every hospital and urgent care center, we need to have medical professionals who, when somebody comes in and says, I've been assaulted, it's like a whole new protocol kicks in. And that's what happens with the sexual assault nurses, right? So there's that, which is great but there aren't enough of them. And then it should be the same way with, and I think the problem with, we have, 15,000 policing agencies in this country, and everyone is its own little fiefdom, right? It's like, the culture of that little agency depends on the guy, or, you know, the man usually, or sometimes woman at the top, and what that person decides, you know, how they're going to treat victims, how they're going to investigate. Is it going to be that we're going to, you know, give them time before we give them an interview? I mean, that's one of the things, right? Is like that some best practices say you need to interview immediately to get all the details. Some say you need to allow them to have the shock wear off. So you give them a little time and then they'll be more willing to talk. You need to go back and forth. And then there's best practices in terms of how to conduct an interview so that it doesn't feel like you are interrogating the victim, right? All this stuff is like, you know, and Danielle, you may be even involved in this, but there are people who are involved, you know, everybody from therapists to lawyers and to police practitioners who are involved in creating these best practices, right? And training, you know, first responders, you know, EMTs, cops on the beat, detectives, investigators, prosecutors, all the way on up, to deal with sexual assault victims with a certain kind of sort of attitude. But not every agency is going to do that. And not every cop's going to do that, even if they've been trained to do that, right? And so it's like, if you happen to live in a place where the cops have gone through this training, then maybe you get treated a little better. If you happen to live in a place where, you know, the cop who got called just doesn't even, you know, believes that most women who, you know, cry rape, like, you just got that cop, there's nothing you can do about it, right? So it's the haphazardness is so terrible. But I think, you know, we just have to keep banging away at, there is a way to do this with that's not only healthy, right, and supportive, but that is going to end up with a better solution in terms of justice, right? Like, if you connect with the victim and make them feel supported and make them and make them feel safe, my guess is they're going to be more likely to help you and give you the information you need to potentially find the person who is the violator, right? If you treat them terribly, they are going to do what so many women do and drop out of the process. And how can you blame them?
Mm-hmm. So question about the laws on the books. Is it true that, you know, you talked about how police are always saying, like, there's nothing we can do? Is it really true that the police are unable to respond to rape or sexual assault? And I'm asking the question for someone that, what tools do police officers have? And, you know, through your experience, I realize you're not a lawyer, but
right, I'm not or cop, but, you know, my sense is that, you know, if I call the police and say, you know, I've just been assaulted, you know, somebody's going to come to my house, or they're going to have them, you know, meet me at the hospital or maybe at the police agency, and they're going to interview me, and they're going to make a decision after having interviewed me and maybe looking around my place, or looking, you know, whatever information I give them, maybe I give them my phone, you know, whatever, about whether or not they think this warrants further investigation. And what further investigation it warrants. Will they, if I have a name for them, you know, this person did this to me, are they going to, you know, are they going to go and interview that person? Again, they get to make that decision, right? If I don't have a name for them, if I say, you know, I went to a bar and somebody put something in my drink and I wound it up home and this was what happened, you know, are they going to go to the bar and with my picture and say, who was this person talking to? And like, all that is their decision. Right? They decide if they want to investigate. And that's even before we get anywhere near like a prosecutor, right? Like, you know, they could investigate and decide, okay, here's the evidence we believe to charge this person, and go to the prosecutor. The prosecutor could say, I don't think this is enough for a jury. We're not going to go ahead and charge. Right. So there's all these steps where law enforcement has all the power to decide what the next steps are. And, you know, and then some cases where, you know, like the Steubenville case, right? Where, law enforcement, for whatever reason, had either not been, you know, had decided like, you know, we're not going to look at this. The media, in this case, anonymous, got involved and made it a public outcry. And so that helped, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Now, hold on, I have another question. I don't want to steal the time away from folks who have questions, but
oh, well, we're down to 5 minutes.
Was there, we only have 5 minutes. So I don't want to God, the audience has wonderful questions, but was there anything that you edited out of this book? And, did you, what did you choose to take out? Were there things that you left out that were hard for you to leave out?
So much. So this book it's actually kind of a short book. It's only about 65,000 words. Most novels are like more like 80,000 words. I cut more than 70,000 words from this book.
Oh my
like I
goodness.
wrote so
That's a
much.
great question. Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote so much partly because I didn't really know. I knew what the main drama was, but I didn't really know how I wanted it to end. Like I didn't know what the right ending was for Claudia. What would be satisfying but not satisfying. What would be, something like I didn't want to just, there was, I don't know. I didn't want it to just be titillating. I didn't want it to feel like a happy ending with a bow tied around it. I swear I wrote 4 endings. If somebody's asking, I see if Chad had gone to jail, would have been happier.
Yes.
I don't know. I like maybe for a minute, but maybe it could have maybe it would have made her feel a little bit better, but it's not going to erase or really, the trauma of what happened. Right. And eventually he'll get out. It's not like you get he's not going to get life for that. He'll get a couple of years and he's going to get a cushy, he's going to have the best lawyer in the world. He's going to get out in a year or two. He's going to have a nice experience at a country club prison, probably. Right. I think that the problem for a lot of victims is just that there's just no satisfying resolution. So to answer that, yes, I added a lot out of the book. A lot of it was backstory. A lot of it was false starts, going different places with different characters. Yeah.
And in some ways, right, the incarceration piece that when the criminal justice, when it operates accurately and well, it sends the message. That this is wrongful behavior and can serve an important deterrent value. Right. But you shrug your shoulders, I saw, and rightly so, because it's so complicated that all the lives, you can't undo it. Right. It's like part of her, when you read it, it's part of Claudia, right? That you can't shake it out of her and that she can't let it go. And that all that pain and suffering is still there, and that ripple effect from her family and loved ones and groups, so that it's like the structures that even if all that works, right?
Even if all that works, it's like, it's not gonna, oh wait, here, hold on. This is the book I was telling you about. Michelle Bowdler, Is Rape a Crime?
Yes. Okay, great.
I'm stage managing with all the books that I want to.
I love that. I feel like I channel you then in class. I'm always helping my students about literature that they can read. Because, as you helped show us that any wonderful book is built on, wonderful different other books and literatures and helps us change the way we think. And so this book did that. And I hope this book does that in classrooms and, in conversations around the dinner table, so that we can look hard at ourselves and see that intimate privacy violations and sexual assaults are so deeply harmful. And that as a society, we need to integrate those lessons and change our behaviors and support other people. So, I know I think I have to wrap up. But so Julia, thank you so much for writing the book, for keep writing all these crime novels. I wish I could say, I want to take you back and have you be in the journalism sphere to help work with me on educating law enforcement.
I'm teaching journalism, and and it's really, you should feel there are a lot of amazing young people who are coming into journalism and want to and will make a difference. These are passionate, excited, dogged people, and working with them is it's so much less depressing than being on the crime beat all day long.
So we'll see many more journalists working with lawyers and law professors to help change hearts and minds about suffering and harms and privacy invasion, so that we can make the world a slightly better place, hopefully. So we can try together. So with that, the Law Tech Center is so grateful that you came. You are our first speaker. And this was an amazing inaugural event, and it means the world to me to have been able to work with you all these years, and then now to be your just fan from the sidelines and have you come speak. So I'm honored. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Thank you all.
Yes, it was a wonderful event. Thank you.